Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar that's brought to you by our College Sports Communicators CSC U committee. Tonight, we're pleased to offer you this session for young and aspiring professionals, and we'll be talking about the topic of game planning for content. We're going to be discussing creative strategies for social media and websites outside of the competition season and what you can look forward to doing during the summertime. Thank you for joining us tonight or this afternoon, wherever you may be and what time zone you're in. We're going to be discussing strategies on how to find, build, navigate, and prioritize content during the off season. Our main goal today is to connect on ways to keep our audiences engaged, from storytelling and athlete features to creative social campaigns and setting timelines. This webinar is being recorded today and will be offered to all who work in college athletics free of charge as an on-demand video and a podcast. Please invite current CSC members and all of your colleagues to watch for future reference. Most importantly, the chat function today will be available for questions at any point during the webinar. Please do not hesitate to speak and ask a question at any point, but please use the chat feature for questions only. I'll start the introductions for this evening. My name is Briley Lawson, and I work as an Assistant Director of Athletic Communications at Palm Beach Atlantic. We're a Division II institution, and I will act as the webinar moderator this evening. Let's get into today's guest panelists, starting with Jessica Radford.
Hi, everybody. I am the Associate Director of Strategic Communications at Conference USA. So I handle all of our communication efforts for volleyball, beach volleyball, women's basketball, and women's golf. So everything written form and all of our social media posts about the sports that I am over, I do all of those.
Next, we'll have Spencer Rubin introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Spencer Rubin. I'm the Assistant AD for Creative Video at Auburn. I oversee our unit, which consists of about 6 people. And then I also assist with our board production and creative video production for football, and then also handle our golfs. So that's currently where I'm at. We're at our men's golf tournament in Georgia. So excited to be here.
And last but not least, we'll have Connor Darnell introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Connor Darnell. I'm the Creative Services and Athletic Marketing Coordinator at USAO here in beautiful Chickasha, Oklahoma. I'm responsible for social media graphics, all sorts of creative content like videos, photos, kind of the one-man shop here at USAO, and just in charge of all the cool-looking graphics and all the fun stuff here at USAO.
Thank you guys for the introduction, and we're going to jump right into it as we have a lot to tackle tonight. So our first question is going to be directed for all of our panelists. We're going to start by asking, when do you start planning for content? A lot of people start by planning in the previous off season, some plan during the season, and some immediately after. Jessica, we'll start with you and kind of hear what you have to say about that from the conference level.
For us, I feel like we're always brainstorming ideas. So that is during the season, immediately after spring season for sure, for the off-season content. But when you have 10 institutions and you sponsor 17 sports, it's always something to talk about at our conference. So we're always trying to stay ahead of the game. And it may not be something that comes in fruition right then and there when we're brainstorming these ideas. It may be an idea that we talked about in February, and now we're like, oh, you remember that idea that we had at that one meeting, and now we can build upon that, and now we can put that out in the summer because it's the perfect time, it's downtime, and we just have more time to actually focus on it and hone in and get those details ready for whatever we're trying to put out.
Yes, totally understand. Having those ideas and being able to build on them later is definitely helpful. Spencer, what are your thoughts, and when is planning best for you?
Yeah, we do a lot of constant ideating. Like I always preach that you should constantly be putting ideas into a bucket and then pulling from them when the time is right, which sometimes is in season, sometimes it's out of season. But yeah, I've always had an ever-growing list of ideas that's kind of carried with me as I've progressed through athletics. Some of them have popped up at the university or institution I'm working at in the moment, and some have popped up 3 down the road. So that to be said, like constantly ideating. In terms of working with an institution directly, though, we all meet way ahead of season. So for a fall sport, we'd be meeting almost about, that happened 3 weeks ago. So in the spring, called the discovery meeting. And that's where everyone, including our coaches, anyone in our external unit, including our fan experience team, comms team, digital marketing team, we're all in a room together. And that's where ideas really start. And then everyone leaves that room and is able to kind of kickstart their ideas and continue it forward. So constantly ideating, but sometimes we have those kickstart meetings like we call discovery meetings, and those are incredibly beneficial for everybody.
I'm sure those Kickstart meetings are really beneficial at a large university like you're at. Switching over to Connor, with how long you've been at USAO, when do you start planning for content, and how does going through multiple seasons with a sport or a team, how does that let you see what works for that team and key dates that you use for that?
Yeah, so we have a meeting every Monday with my assistant athletic director and athletic director, and we kind of just go over different ideas and what's coming up in the next couple weeks. There might be a anniversary of something special coming up, but it's usually year round planning on different off season content. It's kind of hard when you have so many sports going on at the same time, and I think we'll get into that later. But it's usually an all year round deal, and try to meet with all the coaches and kind of see what they're kind of thinking if they want to dive into, I guess, different aspects and different routes of strategies and all that. But usually it's nonstop. So
Thank you. Jumping into kind of transitioning into our next question, how are you finding content ideas for the off season? I know you guys have kind of touched on, ideating and doing it year round. But Spencer, let's start with you. And what do you use as inspiration for content ideas in the off season?
Yeah, so we're constantly looking for stories on the way out for our athletes. So as we know, the transfer portal is very real, but also graduation's real. And so we're looking at stories for athletes on the way out that we can continue to preach. We know our fan base is going to relate to. And at the same time, we look at athletes that are on the way in and how can we showcase their personalities, their brands, and those kind of things as soon as they get there. And so looking at those storylines, talking to them as soon as they get there, talking to the others throughout their time at an institution or after, just to get some of those storylines out. And then also, like I mentioned, tapping into that list of ideas. Like those ideas are ever growing. And then really just looking at ideas that you may find in everyday life. Like we all scroll social media, or I would assume most of us do. If you're going on a walk, you may see something and go, "Hey, that's a cool idea." And so I'm constantly using that as my inspiration. But yeah, that's really where I find my ideas is just intentionally searching, but also unintentionally searching for them.
That's awesome. Jessica, let's jump over to you. And how do you find content ideas in the off season?
Conference USA is very focused on promoting our two new schools that's coming into our league starting July 1. So we are heavily focusing on how we can promote those schools coming into our league. For the past 2 summers, we've been doing that. In 2023, we had 4 schools come in. Last year, we had 1 school in Kennesaw State come in. And now with Delaware and Missouri State coming in, we're just trying to figure out like how to still promote them the same way that we did our new schools in the past 2 years, but make it still fresh and make it new. So that is with many of our meeting conversations is about of putting out that content for those 2 schools coming in, and whether that's podcasts, whether that's commercials, whether that's graphics or social, we're just trying to figure out ways of across different mediums of promoting those schools coming into Conference USA. But just like to piggyback off what Spencer said, it's always something popping up, and you just have to be ready to promote those when they do pop up. There's so many trends on Twitter, like the AI graphics right now. So Conference USA, we just put out those AI pictures of our mascots, and those went crazy on our socials. So it's just little things like that that you always just have to be prepared for and just look out for and capitalize on those trends, because it could be so good for your social media and for your schools and just for exposure.
Yeah, I totally understand. I think the student athletes really love to see the trends and how they grow on social media and how, the conference level or your university is tapping into that. And speaking about student athletes, Connor, can you kind of talk about how you communicate with athletes at the level that you're at and seeing what they want for social media and how you incorporate that?
yeah, so here at USL, we're very blessed to have like a smaller setting, and we get to interact with our athletes more. Really get to hear their voice and what they would want for content wise in season and out of season. So there'll be sometimes during the game, somebody will run up to me like, "Hey, Connor, what do you think about this idea? We could do this during season. If you don't have time for it, we could definitely do it out of season." Really just talking with a bunch of our players. Some of them will come into my office throughout the day. Some of them will shoot me a message to my email or to our Instagram and just say, "Hey, let's do some mic'd up content that we could release in July. We're at the World Series. Let's film some content that we could release, whenever everybody gets back on campus." So it's really just hearing everybody out and, every sport. We try to hit every sport. There'll be some days I'll just go to a practice and go talk to the coaches, hey, what do you think about this? And we'll film some content there. If they want to do some sort of graphic series and have an idea for it, we can take that and push that and kind of just start developing those ideas. So whenever it feels like we have some downtime, we can push that out. So it's really just having that chance to talk with our athletes and coaches.
Yeah, that connection makes a job special and makes it a lot of fun. Jessica and Spencer, kind of switching back to you guys. This question is targeted for you. Kind of talk about the style of content that you like to create for the off season. I know you've kind of touched on a little bit, but what do your programs or conference accounts want to see most often?
Yeah, I can kick it off. One thing that I really find is good to play into is just what's going on, like what's going on around you, but also educating. And so, one thing that I love to do is create a FOMO, a fear of missing out for our fans and our athletes too. And so we'll constantly do that, bringing back the vibes from a certain venue or the moment of a season, but then also educating them. So what's coming up that's new in our venue? What's coming up that's new with our athletes? Going back to, like I mentioned before, telling the stories of the people that are coming in, not just the ones that are leaving. So what are we looking forward to, and sharing that kind of thing. And a really big thing is the off season poses as a great opportunity to showcase student athletes and coaching personalities. I think one way that you could go wrong with this is just blatantly people will make it very cringy. Sometimes it looks like they're in front of a camera and they probably shouldn't be talking to a camera and no one prepped them. So making sure that you're doing the athlete or the coach justice as well when you're doing those kind of things. But those are the times to do the fun ideas. And I think you killed it, Connor, right there. Like there are so many ideas that pop up in season where you're like, that's a really cool idea if you weren't on a 5-game losing streak, right? And so those are the times to do that in the off season.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jessica, we'll kick it over to you.
For us, we always just have ideas about wanting to switch it up, right? We don't want a lot of our content in written form, or we don't want a lot of graphics. We try to switch up with podcast episodes, or maybe something can be turned into a commercial. And those commercials, sometimes those ideas can be very daunting, and those take a lot more brainstorming and take a lot more time for our video departments to put together. But we're always just thinking of new ways of style of content to put out. But for our football media day, very important for our conference, right? So how can we preview our teams to make people build excitement around our football media day? So we do podcast episodes. We did this last year where we had a preview of each team, and rather that be a coach or a player on, or a beat writer or the radio, like just different people, different perspectives of those teams, to just build excitement around whatever date of our football media day would be on. But just to be like, okay, tune in on this day on ESPN Plus to watch our football media day. And just so many things go on football media day in itself. We want to take photos of we want to do videos or another podcast episode maybe while we're in that setting of football media day. And then also just another thing to wrap our heads around about style of content. We're 30 years of Conference USA. So we have been brainstorming of how to promote those 30 years of Conference USA. Yes, it might not look the same that it did 30 years ago, but we're still a conference here. We're still thriving. So how can we showcase that in different styles and forms of content? So that has been another thing that we've been brainstorming heavily.
I love that. I love that you're still finding ways to engage your crowd and still looking for new ways to engage, after 30 years. Kind of switching over to content, and Connor, kind of talk about how, with you being a one-man shop over at USAO, what are the challenges that you have to focus on with in-season sports, and how do you handle those difficult conversations with coaches and programs when maybe that's not a top priority for you at that moment because you're in spring season and fall is not a top priority at the point?
Yeah, so at times it can definitely be a struggle. There's only a few of us on staff here. So there might be times we have double duty where we have softball and baseball going, and I'll have to step out behind the camera and get up and stat some games. So we might not be able to capture some content that we can use later in the year. As for the sports that aren't in season, kind of goes back to whenever we go and talk with those coaches, like, hey, we might not be able to get to you as soon as we want, but we do have ideas and we do have plans, and kind of just have that conversation like, hey, we still hear you and we're going to work on trying to get something out and something prepared for you guys. I would like to comment on the thing that Spencer said about, athletes might not be the most PR trained. So you never know what type of content you're going to get out of somebody. And then that kind of puts you on pause and you're like, all right, maybe I should release this. Maybe I don't. but just because you have content, maybe you shouldn't be posting some of it, but it always makes for a fun time. And most of our coaches understand, or I should say all of our coaches understand. So it's always changing, and it's hectic at times.
Completely understand. Having come from NAI, I've been there myself. So having that communication and that relationship with your coaches also helps make a really big difference as well. Kind of gearing back to all three of you again, let's hit what kind of tools or apps or strategies do you use to execute the content that you're planning during off season, and even in season, what kind of strategies and apps are you using to help manage that? Jessica, we'll start with you.
For us, we always use our content calendar. So anytime that we have an idea of when we want to post, what time we want to post, we're always using our content calendar. And we're always like, make sure you put it in the content calendar, because somebody could drop the ball really fast with as many sports and as many things that we're trying to put out in a day. So we're very diligent in making that content calendar and making sure that we're putting in it, and then just also making sure that we're posting it at the time that we do, because we do have things that overlap. So maybe we post something at 12, but then we have something else that comes out at 12:30. So we have to be diligent in going on that content plan, but then also executing that as well.
In regards to your content calendar, do you use an app and program for that, or is it just like a calendar through Outlook? Or
Yes, it's a calendar through Outlook that we do. But we also do post if we're trying to post at a certain time and we know that, then we use Sprout, because we can go in there and just automatically, pre-post, and then it does it for us. But some people like to use it, some people don't. Just all depends on the person.
yes, I love the convenience of that. Spencer, will put it over to you.
Yeah, so we always know there's key dates and elements that we're going to need to plan for, and those are things on an annual basis. Those are things like intro shoots. We also do certain tours with our coaches where they go out and they speak to donors or higher level donors, I guess, and supporters of Auburn athletics. But then we also work with our sports internal creatives. We're lucky enough to have those. Three of our sports have internal creatives where they're embedded within the coaching staff and they assist with recruiting content and outward facing content. But we work with them for any heads up on off-season team events. So things where they're going to coach's house or going and grabbing dinner at a barbecue place, whatever it may be. I've seen that done really well when communication is there. And for communication, we're utilizing Red Booth. That's our task management software. We can go in there and assign anything with a date, with people who are assigned to the project. And then it's been very beneficial for me as a leader as well to identify what are my employees up to, what do their workloads look like, what do their plates look like. And so I don't overload anyone or attempt not to. And it only works when people use it. I will say that. You have to put your projects in there, but it is incredibly beneficial. And then for daily communication, we utilize Slack. So if there's a last minute event, I'll get a message from somebody, hey, do you think we can get coverage here? Or, hey, this is coming up in a week, whether it's our comms staff, fan experience staff, social, they're always there. So Slack has been very beneficial. Red Booth has been beneficial, but just general communication, just communicating well has been huge.
Yeah, communication is definitely strong in this field. That's really cool to see the difference between you guys, and kind of switch it over to Connor and see how the NAI level differences from Conference USA and from a Division I school.
Yeah, we utilize Asana. Back in October, I kind of switched over to where I was doing both athletics and working for the university side. So I thought I was busy with just athletics, but ever since I switched over, it seems like we have 4 or 5 different events every week. So I really like Asana. I put in, my athletic stuff for the week. I put my university stuff in for the week and kind of just communicate with everybody in my office like, hey, we've got 2 doubleheaders this week. I'm going to be gone these days, and kind of just hit on what Spencer said about communication. Communication's key, and that's pretty much all that I've got when it comes to that.
Yeah, thank you. Jessica, I'm going to gear this towards you and kind of talking about the communication side of things. You have a unique perspective because you work for a conference. How do you handle press releases and possible feature story ideas during the off season for your sports?
So we do have general releases that we put out during the summer. So those always have a set date that that is coming up that we want to promote. But as far as feature stories, we're always asking SIDs for storylines, especially during their season. So we send out a memo before seasons just about player of the week, how we're going to do, just graphics or just general communication about the sport. And then at the end, it's always like, hey, if you guys have anything in significance that you want us to broadcast on the conference level, please give it to us, right? And like we said, it's a bunch that goes on, so we can't promote it then, but then it's like in the off season, it's like, hey, I remember this story about this women's tennis player. We should promote this now. So we try and lean on our SIDs for those stories. And we're so grateful for them because they do provide us a lot of information because we're not there on campus. So try to get those. And then if we do remember, or we have those on file, but if we can pick out different stories from different sports because we don't want to focus on one sport throughout the summer. Like I said, we do sponsor 17, so we can switch it up a little bit. And that's what we heavily lean on. So feature stories is very important, but the written aspect of it for those press releases is generally generalized, and we know what's coming before it's supposed to be released.
That's really cool. I know a lot of people get interested when they get to see a highlight story on athletes and get to kind of see what goes on behind the scenes. Kind of switching into the off-season content and how you analyze it. Do you use any kind of apps or strategies to analyze the success of your off-season content? And how do you communicate what you analyze to coaches and admins? This field, working in it, we all know it's a very stressful and hard field. And so if we don't advocate for ourselves and, discuss that with administration or coaches, then, nobody else will do it for us. So we'll kind of start with Spencer. And if you could talk about how you go about handling that.
Yeah, I think for me, I've always had a hard time looking at it from a statistical perspective. I'm very statistical myself of like, I want to see numbers, but it's hard to evaluate that. Like when you put it straightforward, your off season is going to be your down season. Like your numbers are naturally going to be lower. So it's hard to look at that and have any relative value outside of what does down season look like in the past. And so for me, it's just making sure expectations are clear from the start, and that expressing exactly what I just said, that off-season content is frequently not going to be as high as your in-season content, but also it's only as good as the access that you have. Your off-season content is going to be as good as a coach lets you into to capture, or as good as your resources are. And so expressing, hey, these are the resources that we have for this, but also, hey, what can you do for us so that we can get in and get some unique angles and tell some unique stories? My biggest thing is that the off season should be intentional and should still be telling a story. You may not have gameplay on a court or on a field, but there should be a story being told still. And so I really got a lot of inspiration 3 years ago from K-State. I think they did a great job capturing. They made an Elite Eight run, and they did a great job capturing their off season. And it didn't just show up in the postseason. It wasn't like they were capturing it, throwing it in an archive, and hoping that it came up later. They were showcasing it from the start. And so that's something that I think everyone can do as long as their coach gives them access. And if not, it's just clear. It's like, hey, we can't tell a story if you don't let us see the story. And so that's from a written, a visual perspective. It doesn't really matter. But that bottom line is, hey, you got to communicate with us and we'll make sure we cover you. So that's how I approach it, not necessarily from a statistic perspective, but more so just making sure expectations are clear and having a realistic perspective on it.
I really like that. Thank you for sharing that insight. Jessica, how do you do that over at Conference USA?
Well, through Sprout, we're able to look at our engagement and see, we can look at it for a month or for a couple months or that week. What post was our most popular and how many engagement, how many people reacted to it. But for us, we also pay attention to the schools and how well when we promote a school, maybe it be Players of the Week graphics, or maybe it's during a championship and we put out something about a certain school. Are you guys reposting it? Are you guys, like quote tweeting it or collaborating with us? Because as much as we want to collaborate with you, you also have to work with us. So we're very diligent in seeing how well each of our schools do that, because it's a give or take situation with a conference. And then you also have schools, right? Because we want to promote your school, but you also have to, when we tweet out something, promote us as well. So shout out to the collaboration feature on Instagram that makes all of our lives easier. I'm pretty sure Connor and Spencer will agree, because when they collab with athletes, that gets a ton of exposure for them and us as well. But we are also diligent in saying like, hey, could you guys repost this? And they do the same thing with us. Like, hey, we think this is a gold mine of a graphic or a video. Can you repost? And we are always good on doing that. But it's also just being diligent and being like, okay, this school may need a little help. Let's pay a little more attention of trying just to get that exposure for your student athletes, because at the end of the day, that's all we care about is the exposure for the student athletes and for the sport itself. So.
Totally understand that. Kind of speaking on that gold mine of graphics and that you were talking about, what are some like favorite off-season projects that you've worked on during your careers that you've seen to do with collaborations and stuff as well?
Well, for me, I think whenever we have our SAC reps come into the conference office, we always do like a media day. So not so much of this is when I was at the WAC. So I used to work at the WAC, but I used to love when we did that. They came in during the summer and we would film little like TikToks or Instagram reels of them drawing their logos or of them just saying I don't know, just little fun, little holiday stuff that we can make commercials out of. But we recently did a project with Conference USA, and it was for, just Women History Month, or I think it was Student Athlete Day. It was either one of those, but we had the girls write a letter to themselves, and we made a commercial out of that. And I absolutely love that. Those student athletes that was picked and chosen to write a letter to themselves and do that commercial, it was so just empowering. And me myself being a student athlete, I just know what I would want to say to my younger version of myself. So I think that project was just like really good, and that fueled me as just like I this is why I do what I do, and I love to do the sport or just to work in sports still.
I love that. Those commercials are definitely heartwarming. And, I've seen a lot with the softball and NCAA and how they'll do a senior day ode to kind of, this letter to myself as a child. And those are always really heartwarming. Connor, kind of swinging it to you. What are I know you work a lot with graphics and content with multiple different platforms at USAO and outside of USAO. So what are some off-season projects that you've done during your career that you've enjoyed doing?
Yeah, a couple of different off-season projects that I've kind of went back and looked at. Um, Outside of USAO, I run a baseball social media outlet for NAI baseball, and we cover the draft. Not too many NAI guys get taken in the draft, but you know last year I think we had 7 or 8 guys get drafted. So it's kind of nice to go back and see, all right, what did we do better this year? Did we get more likes on this just because more people got drafted, or was it the style of content? Did we go into a different avenue and was that successful? So we do some draft content. As for USAO, um, we're very fortunate to work with a bunch of local athletes. So I think seeing the difference in likes and impressions and engagement with our local athletes, that kind of drives home this is a local athlete and they're succeeding at the college level. And I think that does a huge thing for the university, for, the high school that they came from. And it just kind of gets more eyes from that local scene. And I think that's a big part of our engagement, because at the NAI level, it's a small world. So we're lucky enough to have a whole lot of Oklahoma athletes here, and we get a decent amount of out of state and out of country student athletes, and we get good content on those and pretty good engagement on those still.
Yeah, those hometown hero stories are very heartwarming, just like the commercials they do over at Conference USA. Spencer, I want to swing it back to you and kind of ask if there's any projects that you've done in the off season that you've really cherished, and if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, I've always had the most fun in the off season simply because there's more time. But funny enough, the projects that come to mind are the ones that I didn't really have much time for. Every year, everyone knows about schedule releases, like NFL does them. It's become really popular at the college level. And so for football, it started when I was at Mississippi State. I don't know why, but I've never been like a skit writer or anything like that. But I was like, you know what? We're going to write a skit for this. And it was a really cool thing 3 years ago utilizing AI. So we turned all the SEC mascots into AI characters because we acted like our graphic designer was in a rush, forgot the schedule was coming out, and we had to piece it together last minute. And so I say, I have more time in the summer or in the off season, but when it comes to a schedule release, we only get it 24 to 48 hours out. Like we do not have much time to turn that. So you have to be very intentional with how you create it and very collaborative. And one of my favorite things with that project and other ones that I've done as well are that everyone from our comm staff to our graphic designers to our photographers to our videographers to our marketing staff, digital staff, everyone had a part in that in order to make it come to life because we only had 24 to 48 hours. The expectation was high. And we had a lot of fun with it, though. I think it's been one of the coolest things I've gotten to do is do those because they're really free and they're fun and they're lighthearted. So again, it goes back to the off season is your chance to be lighthearted without fans complaining that you're 2-10 or whatever it may be in the moment. So I love taking advantage of those opportunities.
That's awesome. You're actually going to tie right into our next questions, but I want to make a call for any questions to be put in the chat before we start wrapping things up here. Again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. You can just drop them in the chat below. But Spencer, as you were saying, that project was all hands on deck. You wanted to make it special. How do you work with other members of strategic communications to work on big picture ideas for content? I know you've already touched on it, but I don't know if there's any other realm just besides what you were just saying that you would like to include.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, like it's really year round. Next year, like next season starts shortly after the current season really ends. It starts with an end of season breakdown, and then a few months later we jump into those discovery meetings that I talked about. So it's a constant conversation. And in between those things, and once we get into season, we're communicating through biweekly or weekly pod meetings where every unit or a piece of every unit comes together and they're communicating what their big high level projects are, so that if there's a play from another unit, they know that it's coming up and they're aware of that. Um, but yeah, I mean, other than that, you got to be collaborative in order to push a brand forward. Whether it's two people working together, whether it's a group of 10 people working together, I mean, you all have to have the same mentality of where it's going. And that's everyone from the coaching staff down to the student photographer that works with the team, once every month, right? So that's something I preach, is just keeping people in line, communicating, and those pod meetings, those discovery meetings play a huge role in that.
That's awesome. Jessica, we'll kind of switch it over to Conference USA and how you were talking about, even with the off-season stories and how you reach out to SIDs. How do you stay involved and engage with those people?
For us, just not even just SIDs on campus, but at our conference level, we're always having weekly meetings on Tuesdays. So obviously, with me only having certain sports and my coworkers in our communications department, they are divvied up in the rest of the sports. But they also do the same thing as well. Their SIDs are giving storylines, or we're seeing something on Twitter or on Instagram, and we're like, hey, let's expand on that. But we always have external department meetings on Tuesdays, and I think that's always brainstorming ideas, right? We're talking about what we have coming up, but then we always get on a tangent of, oh, let's do this, or oh, let's do that. Like, that could be a great idea. And then we spin off of that and we're like, okay, let's make a creative content meeting. And that can be a different day with a few different people. But we're always just brainstorming ideas, and as a group, and as marketing, as graphics person in there, we have a videographer, we have our broadcast and TV person, and the rest of our communications department. So it's so many creative heads in one space. And that's why so many ideas just come to fruition in that meeting. And then we also sometimes have our sponsorship person in there, and we have the sponsorship with Sucker Punch, who loves to give us pickle shots and all of those pickle things. And our student athletes love them. So it's just like, okay, in off season, how can we, expand that brand and that sponsorship? So it's not even just student athletes. It's also, how can we tap into our sponsors and, promote them and their brand and their products, because our student athletes love their products and they're at every championship. So how can we also promote that? So I think it's so fun and different sides of it, because it's not just all student athletes on the conference side. It's also outside factors as well.
That's awesome. We want to make one last call for questions before we switch it over here to Connor. Please don't hesitate to ask anything that you might be thinking of right now. Go ahead and drop it in the chat, and we'll be sure to get to that right after we talk to Connor. Connor, you have a unique perspective because you're working you're working in athletics and also on main campus. So kind of tap into how you work with both sides of the school in order to communicate, and especially during the off season.
Yeah, so I think it kind of starts with that Monday meeting. We have a meeting every Monday at 9 o'clock. And as soon as I get done with my athletic meeting, I go straight into our marketing communications meeting at 10 o'clock. So it's kind of like just laying out, hey, what have we got this week? What needs to be done? What do we got in the next few weeks that's coming up? Like last weekend, we had Alumni Day and Senior Day for baseball and softball. So, we kind of planned that and started creating a graphics package for that a couple weeks ahead of that, and kind of just getting everybody's ideas and just going with that.
That's awesome. Well, I want to ask you guys as a group, we'll start with Jessica first, but what's one final takeaway that you have? Like, what's one thing that you want to leave with the people today that's kind of like, this is how I hone in on off season, and this is what I would recommend for you to have the best success possible?
For me, I know it may seem like it's a lot going on at once. Of course it is. There's so many sports. We love crossover season. I always say that during crossover season. But it's so important to start early, just so when you have that sit down and be like, okay, we're finally in the off season. What ideas or what things can we put out? You're already having a little bucket of ideas to, go off of. So it makes it 10 times easier when you start early. It could just be a little sentence of, hey, we should put out a graphic for volleyball, right? And then it's like, okay, we should put out a graphic for volleyball. What type of graphic? And you can expand on it from there. But at least you still have that one idea of, okay, we have this. Let's put a plan in motion for that. And also, I think it's like just keep it light and fun. The off season should be fun, right? We all are tired and probably burnt out from the season when fall and spring. I think it's so important to keep it fun on the off season, especially when you're on campus, because your student athletes also like to have fun and they like to do things that make them laugh and just enjoy the day, whether it be TikToks or video or just a written form, and you're just sitting down them asking a Q&A, right? But just keeping it fun and light, and that's also good for your audience. I see it all the time. Everything that's fun and out there and in your face, it always attracts a lot of engagement. So I think if you focus on that, then it'll be great.
Yes, totally agree. All the fun content definitely gives your fans more engaged and the audience more engaged as well. Spencer, we'll swing it over to you. What's one final takeaway that you have?
Yeah, I would say there's three big things that I like to preach. Collaboration is one, like I just mentioned. Organization, as Jessica just mentioned, like that's a really big deal. Staying organized and getting ahead of it so that you're not, trying to catch up after the fact. Being proactive instead of reactive is what I like to say a lot. And then just open-mindedness, like the fun stuff that you're talking about. Have an open mind. Try to pitch something. Don't be closed-minded. And really approach everything with a solution-oriented mindset. That's something that will take you a lot further than getting frustrated that something didn't work one time and then shutting it down 20 more times. Figure out how you can make that work eventually. It may not work right now, but how can you make it work eventually? Can it work in the off season? Can it work next season? Can it work a year from now? Can it work with a new coach? Unfortunately, that's sometimes the case. But that's where I go back to putting those ideas in buckets and keeping them put away for when the right time comes. So, yeah, just being collaborative, being organized, and being solution oriented, I think can take you a really long way.
I love that. That's awesome. Connor, what are your final thoughts from today?
Like how Spencer said, keep an open mind to different ideas. I tell a lot of our athletes, like, there's not a bad idea, and we're open to hearing every idea. And I guess another thing I'd like to say is, if there's a GA at some small school or somewhere that really wants to pursue this field, don't do it for the wrong reasons. Do it because you want to have fun and create cool stuff and tell stories about these student athletes. And I like to say, I don't really have a job because I love my job, and I don't really work. I get to go have fun every day and create cool stuff and story tell about these student athletes and their incredible careers. So yeah, it's just have fun with it. Listen to ideas and really get to know your athletes and find a way to show them off.
That's awesome. Well, that's all that we have time for today. We would like to give a big thanks to all of our panelists today for the discussion and insights on best practices and creative strategies for social media and websites outside of competition seasons and in the summertime. We encourage all of you to check out our website, collegesportscommunicators.com. This is where you can find updated information, our on-demand professional development webinars, podcasts, and membership news. Thank you everyone again for being with us today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day or your evening, depending on your time zone.